Thank you. Now we have a few people that remember Glenn well and wish to express some of those thoughts for us all. And I'll begin with one of my old college roommates. George, please. George Morris. What year, George?
Class of 70 from Iona, 68 at the frat, I believe. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, George.
This is kind of off the cuff, I'm afraid, but John mentioned we were roommates for a while. We lived in a rented attic apartment on Webster Avenue, and temporarily one summer we had a little dispute with our landlord, so we moved out in a huff. I shouldn't say a huff, it took the better part of an afternoon to put all my junk into my old convertible. And we sublet an apartment on Park Place in New Rochelle. And it was in the basement, and it was a dump. And my most vivid memory, Glenn wasn't there with us, but my most vivid memory of Glenn was him coming to visit us, looking around, waiting for something to fall on his head. And as usual, he had lots of things to say, lots of gossip to tell about the college, because he worked in financial aid and admissions office at the college, and always had stories to tell. But this time it was through gritted teeth, literally. Because he had had a horrendous car accident and his jaw was wired shut for the better part of the summer. And undeterred, he held forth, telling us all about what the business office, and then we got a fictitious student admitted to Iona, and of course he's having they get fired over it, but he'll get done. His family has money, and now they're not getting a new building. And he went on and on. But that was Glenn. Glenn was my roommate for I think another summer up on Webster Avenue. That was Glenn. He was every place. He said I need a place between my two apartments or between my two places. So he was with us up at Webster Avenue again over the summer, and he introduced me to the glories of raw hot dogs. I came home one night. I came home one afternoon from work, and both John and I worked for buildings and grounds here at the college. And it was hot, miserable, dirty work, unless you pulled the plum duty, and that was polishing the floors in the brother's house over here. I had this thing in the window called an air conditioner. And it was one of 3 on campus. One afternoon, Glenn was going through it. Glenn had something to do. Glenn was every place, but Glenn had something to do, deliver to the brother's house, and I was there polishing the floor. And he said, "This is nice." He said, "You know what's over on the other side, don't you?" I said, "No." He said, "Listen, turn your machine off a minute." I listen, I hear this hum. And he said, "Just look there. Don't tell him I told you." And he walks out the door, and the other side was a beer cooler. This big with a barrel in it, with the thing, and they had some kind of camouflage. I think they had a statue of St. Patrick. Thanks to Glenn, whenever Brother Warren couldn't figure out something for us to do, I remember what Glenn told me. I said, "Hey, brother, those floors in the brother's house are pretty bad." "Oh, yeah, go over and do that." Yeah. He always was full of helpful advice. When I was a freshman, he overheard me grumbling one time to one of my fellow students that I was supposed to get my scholarship was supposed to be full tuition after state aid, I'm only getting half, And he overhears this, and he said, "Well, why don't you tell somebody?" I said, "Oh, I don't know, they might kick me out of school or something." So the next day I get a message summoning me to the financial aid office. I said, "You got me kicked out of school." And Mr. Biondi, the late Mr. Biondi, God rest his soul, called me into his inner sanctum and said, "I understand you have a gripe. What is it?" And I said, but I'm supposed to get full tuition. He said, "Oh, you're right." So beginning of my sophomore year, I paid no tuition because Glenn overheard a conversation and told somebody what was going on. But he was every place. He was all over. He was the Renaissance man of the campus. As I remember him, no matter what student activity, if he wasn't involved in it, he didn't have his hand in it, he was there to support it, And so it was when the fraternity began. Asking Glenn to write a constitution was like asking somebody to write a grocery note. He just had this gift of, with, I believe, collaborating, but they just came up with this magnificent thing that looked like it had come from James Madison or Thomas Jefferson or something. And so it was, our fraternity was built. But more important than anything else, I think, is what neither Glenn nor any of us realized what was happening at the time. He was planting seeds. I didn't see or hear from Glenn for many years until I heard something, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, where he was and what he had been doing. And yet this wonderful gathering tonight, and another one we had about 6 months back, and the love with which we greeted each other tonight is all really, really due to him and people of like mind who encouraged that and fostered that feeling of fellowship that this whole college has always been about to me. And this is why it still holds a place in my heart. So tonight we indeed celebrate someone who recognized that, as the scripture said, no one lives for himself, and no one dies for oneself. And in the name of all of us here, I say thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, George. And from a few years later on, Steve Grockey.
A man of few words.
What year, Steve?
Pardon?
What year?
I pledged for Sigma in the spring of '68, and I graduated in May of '71. I think we had one woman on campus at the time, full time, and now I hear they've taken over. Things have changed, so for the better, I guess. We all move on, we all do things. Acknowledgement to Glenn's sister Valerie, who took care of him with him, and he took care of her equally. And thank you. There's a million stories in Glenn's life. I know a few, I know a lot. In the early years, we all had to wear ties and jackets. And some of us, me included, were the ones that got dungarees allowed on campus. And no more ties. But George reminded me, red tie. I wore this all the time, and Brother Daly was always calling me in the office, and I said, it's a tie. It's a definition of tie. It wraps around the neck. Glenn was over in the financial aid office, which I believe was across the hall from Daly's office. I think Daly was dean of students or punishment or whatever. And Glenn was, yeah, go get him. So Glenn was the good guy, I was the bad guy, in a good way. And we got things done. Glenn had an idea from the founders and whatever. Glenn knew how to schmooze it through the administration, and I knew the details of how to get it done. My degree was in accounting, so that qualified me in their minds to be treasurer and whatever, and financial stuff. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was here to learn how to do it. But anyway, so I wore this tie. I wore some sort of jacket. I think it was just a suit coat. Glenn wore his, I remember he was always wearing a windbreaker, but he had a proper tie. And always looked dapper, never a hair out of place. I think he and Hollywood Hader, who can't make it here, but one of the early brothers, they had a competition which Phil Schwetz picked up on and followed in their footsteps of never having a hair out of place. Well, I'm here tonight. I wasn't going to come. I told Mike, I talked to Glenn 3 days before he died. I said, we're at peace. Thank you for reconnecting me with Glenn a year prior. Glenn and I communicated a lot. He told me all about where his life went. I told him where my life went. And it was every story I hear from Glenn or myself or the brothers was success. I don't know if Iona did it or Sigma did it or if we brought that to the community, but it was all good. I was sad to hear that Glenn passed. I am here tonight. I told Mike, I'm not coming. I don't need to come. Glenn and I are settled, no problems. I'm not coming 2,000 miles. I don't do reunions. Hadn't talked to a lot of the brothers in 40-something years, and then at one of the reunions. Mike had me there for 15 minutes from 2,000 miles away. He set up his iPad, and it was great seeing all the people. Unfortunately, Glenn was not at that one. He was still alive, but couldn't make it to that. He did come to an earlier one, and I told Mike, I'm going to come. I don't need to come. Well, that night, and it was after Glenn had passed, I get this message. Because I do that stuff. And I'm getting stuff now. But anyway, I talk to the other side, or they talk to me. It's impulses, but you don't need the details. And Glenn said, as he always did, Brock, it's not about me, Glenn. It's not about you. It's about them. He said, do it for them. Be there for them. I'll be on your shoulder. He said, I'll jump off and meet around with you. He said, but you're my carrier. I said, okay, thank you, I'll do it. And I called Mike and said, I'm coming. Then I called American Airlines to make arrangements. And with months and months of notice, I waited till about 2 months prior. And American said, I wanted to go to Albany to visit a friend. And long story on that, but not for tonight. And American said, we're all booked out on that. I said, okay, send me to Newark, and, I'll work it out, the details. And, I gave it up to God. Turns out, ends to Glenn. Because I made the reservations, called my friend, I said the next day, these are the flights I've got. I have to call American within 3 days. When I called American back, the guy came on and said, I got your reservations in front of me. You want to book them now, pay for them? I said, well, I really wanted to go to Albany. I said, and back in June when my dad passed, I did the same flight, but they put me on US Air and had me go from Albuquerque backwards to Phoenix, to Charlotte, to Albany. The guy says, let me check that out. He said, well, you can't leave on Monday and return on the Saturday because that's all booked up. He said, how about Tuesday departure and return, whatever it was, Sunday or... He said, just shuffle it a day. I said, yeah, that'll work out. And this is how I know Glenn was involved, because he always did me favors in college, because I did things, it was unconditional love at those days. And they put me on US Air, first class, round trip. They said, well, it's a 6:30 flight. I said, I'm a night person, but I can do it for Glenn. And I said, I can honor him by accepting what he put in my lap, the benefit of first class, and to be here. Not for Glenn, although he deserves it, we all know. Not for me, but for everyone else. Glenn was like that. Maybe that's why we get along so well. So anyway, thank you, Glenn. I'm glad you're here.